Hello and welcome. In this workbook, we're putting ourselves in the position of some bookkeeper or some other similar profession where we've received an expense report from a client and an asset list from a client. And our manager has told us to take that list and expense report and clean it up and prepare manager ready outputs. So the manager outputs in this case are just questions that our manager has told us to ask of the data. So we have one here for this expense data where it's a very small business. We have all of their 2026 expenses and we need to calculate these things here. And similarly, the same client has provided us with an asset list, and we need to calculate or answer these manager questions here uh, based on this asset list. But before we answer those manager questions, we need to do some cleansing, it's called. We need to clean the data a little bit. Okay. Um, in doing this is meant to be like a student's first ever exposure into Microsoft Excel. So I'm going to be explaining things in as much detail as possible, assuming that you know absolutely nothing. So the first thing we need to do here is to create a clean vendor name and invoice number column. So I'm going to Control C this, and I'm going to Control V over here so that I can remember what I'm working on. My brain is very small, and I might forget. So we need to create a clean vendor name and invoice number column. Now in column C, you can see here that there is a raw vendor where we have within one column the vendor name and the invoice number associated with that. When working with data, it's always best to keep one column as one field. It's never a good practice to mix and match different fields. Here, what should happen is that the vendor name is one field and the invoice number is a different field. So we have like a clean vendor name and invoice number field here and here. So we need to take this data and split it into two different columns here and here. Now, I mentioned this is intended to be a student's first ever exposure into Microsoft Excel. However, I'm assuming that you're generally familiar with spreadsheets somewhat. Recognizing that there are two dimensions to a spreadsheet, meaning that there are columns and rows. The columns are are here shown as the vertical component, the up and down, and they're labeled alphabetically from A all the way to XFD. So there are several columns that exist. The rows are indicated numerically, starting at 1 and go all the way to just over 1 million. The combination of the column and the row indicates each cell address. The intersection is the cell address. Right now, cell F9 is the active cell. I can tell because I can see it here as well as the border that exists around it. But if I am navigating here, there are multiple ways to do that. Control right will bring me all the way to the extent of the spreadsheet, so all the way to column XFD, and Control left will bring me back to column A. If I'm in column F, for example, Control down will bring me all the way to the very bottom of the spreadsheet. So row 1,048,000. Control up will bring me to row number 1, F1. So Control down, Control up. It's going to row number 1 because there's nothing to interrupt the active cell. However, if I'm in column A and I hit Control up, it's going to stop as soon as it sees data. So if I go Control up, it stops at row 26 because there's data there. Control up again will bring me to row 1. So it spans through continuous data until the last data point. And then if nothing interrupts it, we'll just go to the very end. So some quick little navigational tips. But what are we working on here? We're working on trying to figure out or to create a clean vendor name and clean invoice number, essentially splitting apart column C. We're going to do that using 3 different methods. The first one being flash fill. Flash fill is fairly easy and intuitive feature in Excel. What I'm going to do here is just the vendor name in row number 1 is Office Depot. So we're going to start typing Office depot. When I press enter, it's going to go down to row number 3. It's going to go vertically within the column. Enter. Here, the vendor name is RentCo, and I'm going to start typing R for RentCo, and here is Flash Fill. It recognized the pattern automatically. So Flash Fill is a pattern recognition tool that assists with data entry in Excel, meaning that if there is a repeatable pattern, Flash Fill will hopefully recognize it. So what I'm going to do now is press enter. Flash Fill will have filled it. And I know that was flash fill because I have this flash fill icon that exists here. I have flash fill icon options it's saying. I'm going to do that same thing now for the invoice number column. INV001. Enter. INV145. And flash fill recognized the pattern. It recognized that I was trying to extract the data from column C. I'm going to press enter here. So this worked for the most part, but it actually did not work very well in row 20. The vendor name is Office Depot, but it didn't recognize the pattern. Well, it did, but the pattern actually does not apply to row 20. The vendor name is Office Depot, but the transaction type is not a purchase, it's a return. So it didn't do it properly here for us. But I'm going to Control Z. That's something that we need to be aware of with Flash Fill. It allows us to recognize the pattern very quickly, to enable data entry quickly. But if there is a break in the pattern later on in the data set, it is possible that there will be an error. But there's more than one way to activate Flash Fill, and that's what I want to show now. So it will, Office Depot, recognize the pattern if a pattern exists, RentCo, and it basically does it as soon as I start typing just one character in the second row, of which there's data, row 3 overall. But let's say I don't want Flash Fill to populate the rest, or let's say I accidentally closed Flash Fill, and I did it intentionally here. I just pressed escape on my keyboard, and I press enter. Let's suppose I actually did want Flash Fill, but I did that accidentally. What I can do is select my 2 data points and the rest of the range with which I want to put the Flash Fill response. I go to Data on the ribbon. Within the Data Tools group, there's Flash Fill, so I would just click Flash Fill, and over here, similar thing, INV001. And maybe even with just one data point, it will be enough. So I'll select the range, and I'm doing that here with just a select, shift on my keyboard, and select again, click with my mouse, and that will select all of the data points that exist between my first selection and my last one. And then I'm going to go to Flash Fill and see if it does it, and it does. But again, remember, the pattern breaks here for this refund, so Flash Fill could contain errors. There's an alternative way, and maybe I'll just highlight that for us here. There's an alternative way to go about this. And to demonstrate this, what I'm going to do is Control C on my keyboard. I'm going to actually do this over here somewhere. Column N, Control V. Copy, paste, Control C, Control V. There's something also that's called text to columns. What I'm going to do to use this is text to columns is a tool that allows you to split one column into multiple columns based on a pattern that exists within a cell, or based on a character within Excel. So I'm going to select the data here, go back to the Data tab on the ribbon, and there's this text to columns button, a very useful feature in Excel that we're going to be talking about probably multiple times. I'll click on this, and I can split a column based on like a specific character that exists within the cell, or based on what's called fixed width. That means like a certain number of characters. I don't want fixed width here, but I'm just going to go next to demonstrate. Like if, for example, I always wanted it to be after like the 10th character or whatever it is, I could split it based on that. But you can see here that that actually does not produce what I intended to produce. So I'm going to Control Z to undo that. Going back to text to columns, again, I want something that exists within the cell, so delimited. And I'm going to click on next. And here you'll notice the pattern likely. There's always like a dash or hyphen character that is splitting the vendor name from the invoice number. So I'm going to say the character I'm looking for is this hyphen character, and that's going to allow me to split. It gives me a preview of what it's going to look like. So if I click finish now, what was one column is now two columns. The treatment of this refund is a little bit different. It didn't find the hyphen character, so it didn't split this refund, which actually might be a better approach here. But something to be mindful of with the text to columns approach, which is what I just did, is the treatment of spaces. Notice how there's a blank space here and a blank space here. That is going to limit our ability to analyze this data appropriately moving forward. So if you're using this approach, be mindful of that. A quick way to get rid of the spaces, at least in the invoice column, would be to select the data, and I can hit Control H on my keyboard, and I'm going to say like find what? I'm going to say find a space character here and replace it with nothing. And that will get rid of all of those spaces in the invoice column. Now, I don't actually want to do the Control H replace method in column N in this example because Office Depot has a space between it. So just be mindful of that. But that's the text to columns feature. The last thing I'm going to show you is text functions here. So what I can do, there are text functions that exist in Excel, and I'm actually going to try to demonstrate this. I'm going to insert a couple of columns to demonstrate this. So I'm going to take column A, select it entirely. When you hover your cursor above a column, you get that black downward vertical arrow. That selects the entire column. If I were to right click and click on insert, it shifts everything in that column and all subsequent columns after it to the right. So right click, insert. And what I'm going to do here is try to split column C into different columns using text functions. This is actually a little bit more advanced, so it's not the focus of this video. We're going to be addressing text functions later on, much later actually. So this is just going to be a foreshadow on what's to come. But there's like left, for example, a feature called left, where if I were to insert a function called left and pass it this cell here, this text, and I can specify the number of characters here. So Office Depot, that's 12 characters, I believe. If I type 12, I have Office Depot. So left and then the number of characters. And if I were to copy and paste this down, which I can do just like that, I have like something that reasonably resembles just the vendor name. But we can make this a little bit better by combining other functions within it. In fact, I'm going to insert another column here. And I'm going to insert another function called len, or length. So if I use len and then I pass it a cell, it tells me how many characters exist within that cell. So in cell C2, there are 21 characters. Okay, so how can we use that to our advantage? If there are 21 characters, you can actually see here all of the invoice numbers. They are 6 characters in length, all of them. INV 255. That's 6 characters. Before those 6 characters, there's also a space dash space. So that's 3 extra characters. So there's a consistent pattern that exists after the vendor name in that there are 9 characters after it. So I can use that to my advantage. What I can say here is I can embed or adjust my original left function, and I can say instead there's 21 characters in the cell based on the length function, and minus, how many was there again? I think there was 9. Is that right? Minus that. Now what I can do is copy and paste this all down. And I have isolated the vendor name based on the number of characters that exist within the cell. And in fact, what I can do is I can even embed this length function. I'm going to Control C. Maybe I'll delete this. And Control V that directly within my left, and I have isolated the vendor name. So I can follow a similar approach. So this is like using left, for example. I can follow a similar approach to the invoice number using a function called write. Now, write just comes from the right side of the cell. So here I'm saying I'm using a function called left. Oops, left. And I'm saying like give me the X number of characters starting from the left hand side of the cell. But I can do the same thing with the right. So right is going to take the number of characters I specify from the right. The invoice number always follows the same pattern, INV001. So what I can say is I want the 6th characters from the right side of the cell. So INV001 is another way in order for us to isolate the left and the right hand side, or the vendor name and vendor number. But again, notice how the treatment here of the refund doesn't really apply. What we could do with our text functions is embed it within an if, which we haven't introduced yet. So we're going to hold off on that. But be mindful, all 3 of these skills that we talked about, flash fill, text functions, which is our left and our right, and text to columns, it all didn't really handle this refund very well. So be mindful of that. Here, what I'll do just in this case is just copy paste Office Depot. We're going to just manually add that in, which is usually not a very good practice. But in this case, we're going to do it. And here, for the invoice number, I'm going to say refund, just so we can move on. But that's part 1. Expense data, create a clean vendor name and invoice number. Now, just to be sure here that we do have a clean vendor name as a final check, what I'm going to do is use a unique function. And I'm going to pass it all of the vendors that exist with above here. And what you can see actually is that RentCo is appearing 2 different times. Now that is a little bit of a problem. RentCo is appearing twice because there must be a blank space in one of them. And in fact, that was a random lucky guess. This is actually my first time looking at this data, which is not a good practice. I know as an instructor looking at this for the first time, but there's a blank space here. I hope you can see this in the recording. So if I were to find another RentCo, notice how there is no blank space after it. So what I'm going to do here is, for this first one, I'm just going to delete it, delete that blank space, backspace, and see if that gets rid of it. So now RentCo in my unique function only exists 1 time, which is what we want. That will enable us to do more analytical work if the vendor names do not repeat. So pretty important here. So there we have it. So I'm glad I did that last little check. Okay, so we've done that. And now moving forward to number 2, which is to standardize categories. And again, we have some skills here in which we can do that. So because we're working on number 2, I'm going to copy and paste this into the expense data for here, just to remind myself on what I'm working at. So we have, what do we have? all of these categories that exist right here. And we have a category much like a column, much like we had for vendor. And we've cleaned vendor up and we've cleaned invoice up. And now we just need to clean up the category. And it says that there could be inconsistent in blanks. Okay, so we have a clean column in which to put this. So there's a couple of ways of going about this. These look fine to me for the most part, but obviously are some mistakes. And in fact, just scanning it, I can see there is an inconsistency in row number 2 and row number 9. And the way I'm highlighting both of those at the same time is that I just clicked on one, control on my keyboard, and clicked on the other one. So ultimately, when you have structured data, meaning you have different columns or fields, you want to have a field or column, something that's unique. So that's why we separated out the vendor name and the invoice number, because we want each field to be the smallest possible unit of analysis. So here, this is actually a pretty big problem in analytics work. We can't have two different names to represent the same thing. We need one consistent approach. And this one is also slightly different. The O is not capitalized. That one is less of an issue because provided there are no like spaces where they shouldn't be, this one should be equivalent to that one. And in fact, I'll show that quickly here. I'll just copy paste, Control C, Control V, and in between these, I'm going to say if that equals that, then like put okay. Otherwise, put problem. And they're equal to each other. So those two are considered functionally equivalent for any analytical work that you could be doing with this data, even though one is capitalized in the O and the other is not. But anyway, there is a problem between this one and this one. Those are clearly not the same because it's LY and here it's LIES. So we need to do something about that. There's actually a number of different ways of going about this. The first thing I have is filters, which isn't really a way for us to fix the problem, but it's a way for us to diagnose the problem. So here, just to start, I'm going to just select the column. So click and drag. So I'm selecting all of the columns, and I'm going to go to data and just click on this filter button here. And what I can do now is under the category is that it shows me all of the unique items that exist within the column. So I can see that there are two, and it does it alphabetically. So so here, I mean, there's office supplies, and then this different one, office supply, in row number 9. They're not right beside each other, but because I applied the filter, it does it. It lists all of the unique items in the column alphabetically, so that I can see office supply, office supplies. I can see right next to each other that there's a problem. But if I want to have a clean category here, clean category column, what I can do is I'm going to get rid of my highlight, copy this. So select it, copy, paste. And in my clean version, it looks like there's only a problem with office supplies versus office supply. It looks like everything else is okay. So what I'm going to do is just select these two here. If I select only these two, what it will do is just show me all of the rows where these two exist. The data still is here, and it's like all of the other categories are still there. It's just omitting them from my view. So it's just helping me focus in on the problem areas. But if these problem areas, like if I, with these just selected, For example, if I were to control C now on this one, on this, and select the other ones, control V to paste, it pastes over what was there. So now if I were to clear my category, there's not two office supplies categories anymore. I've eliminated it. So I can standardize my categories through these filters and just copy and paste. So that's one way. Let me delete what I just did. I'm going to copy and paste the problematic data back into my clean data again. And I could do the same thing now with the find and replace. So what I'm going to do is I have this problematic data because there's office supply right here and office supplies here. I want just one of these. It looks like this office supply is the outlier. It looks like this one is the one that is different from all the others. All the others are, yeah, there's only one of these. All of the others are pluralized. So what I can do is select this data and then control H on my keyboard. And this is the find and replace dialog. And I can say find office supply and replace it with office supplies, pluralized. And I'm going to replace all. If I click on replace all, it means replace all within my selection. It doesn't replace it everywhere in the workbook. So here I have this like category raw where there is office supply right here. And then I have this copied and pasted version where there's office supply. We'll see that only this one in the clean column is going to be updated. So office supplies here, we made one replacement. There is still office supply over here. And that's okay because this is like my clean one. So that's another thing, another way of going about it. And I also say like text functions here. Text functions, I say, could be used to help standardize categories because they can help to identify where the problematic areas are, using that like length function that I talked about earlier. So if I pass each cell into the length function, I can see office supplies is 15 characters, but office supply is only 13. So it helps to identify where the problem areas are. If they were equivalent, then the number of characters that existed within the cell should be also identical. One other way of going about this could be like if this data set were incredibly large, the quickest way of going about it would be to apply the filter to the problem areas and then just control C and control V over all of it. Another way of going about it, which we'll see later on in this course, is through the use of a lookup function, even though it isn't listed here. But this blank one is actually a problem. So in order to fix this blank one, what we're going to have to do is just assume that whatever category has existed in the past for this vendor just applies also to this one. So I'm going to apply a filter to the Office Depot vendor and say like, oh, we've always only bought office supplies from this. I'm assuming that we're going to we bought office supplies this time. But maybe to differentiate it, I'm going to highlight that so that I know like I made that interpretation based on the pattern in the data. And I know that this is a little bit different. So if my manager were to question me, this is just a way for me to highlight like my mental note about it. All right, so that's number 2. Let's see what we have for number 3. Use formulas to compute totals and answer manager questions. So control C, so I know what I'm working on, and control V. The manager questions are already right here. Total annual expenses is the first one. So what we need here is to basically do a sum. Now, if I were to calculate the total of something, that's just a bunch of numbers added together. So it would be like this number plus this number, plus this number, plus this number, plus that, and so on, all the way until the very end. But you can see here, just based on selecting the first 5, that would take a long time to do. So Excel has created functions of commonly used statistics that allow us to do calculations like addition very, very quickly. So the first of which is the sum function. And the way it works is you type equals sum, and I'm going to press, or to insert a function, you press equals, and then you start typing the function you want. Here, I want the sum function to add numbers together. So it says it adds all the numbers in a range of cells. It's exactly what I want. I'm doing this from my keyboard, and the way that I prefer to do it is just start typing the function you want, which is the sum function, but it will present you with a list of all functions that exist with those characters. I want the sum function. So to select it, like I can use up and down on my keyboard to select the actual one that I want. I want the sum function. The way that I select it now is with the tab. And then I just pass it the numbers that I need. But the numbers that I need exist within a consistent range. So I pass it this range and then close out my brackets and I press enter. And I get 16,585, which I'm assuming is correct, but we're probably going to have to come down back to this. I think I can see a problem. All right. So that's the first one, total annual expenses, but I'm going to maybe highlight this because I think there's a problem. The average monthly utilities. All right, so we have our category here. We have this utilities, and it exists. We have, it looks like 5 utility bills. Now, this here, January, February, is going to be a little bit challenging for us to do because I actually don't know what this means by average. There are 12 months in a year, but there are only 5 bills. So I don't actually know if this is asking me for what are the average of the bills that I've received. Am I assuming that these 5 bills are representative of 12 months of consumption or not? If these 12 bills are representative of 12, or sorry, if these 5 bills are representative of 12 months, then I cannot use the average function for Excel. But if these 5 bills are representative of 5 months worth of consumption, I can use the average function. So it really depends on what my base amount is. So we do have to make an assumption here in order to answer this. My assumption here is that I want to average together the bills that we have received. To average something out in Excel, you use the average function. So if I were to use the average function and pass it all of these cells here, this range of cells, it's going to give me the average transaction size here. So the average transaction size is $721, but it's not asking for the average transaction size. It's asking for the average of just the utilities. So what I actually need to do here is introduce a condition into my average function. I don't want all of the numbers averaged together. I only want the numbers averaged together if they are utility related. So what I actually need to do is an average if function. So here I have average if. So I started to type average, and then I'm going to navigate down to average if, because I only want to average the numeric values together if utilities is present in column H. So there's three arguments here that I need. I need a range of cells in a criteria first. The criteria is the filter you want to apply to your average function. Basically, I only want to average together column E if column H is equal to utilities. So I'm going to select column H first and say my criteria is utilities and put it in quotation marks because it's a string value. Press comma, and then I pass it an average range here. Average range. And press enter. And I get this numeric value. So notice how my average, my global average of all of the transactions is 721. But if I'm applying a filter to it, it's actually 312. So let's just look at this for a moment. In fact, you know what? I think there's a potential problem here too. So let's look at this after we fix the problem, and we're going to find it really quite soon, the problem. So it's asking here to count the numeric entries here. So I can see like there's the data starts on row 2 and it goes to row 26. So there's probably 25 rows of data that exist. But I want a formula to do that for me. The formula that counts numeric entries is not so cleverly named. It's called the count function here. So I'm gonna say count, and I'm gonna pass it the numeric values here, the amount. And I get this number of 23. But remember, it's like it started on row 2 and goes to row 26. That should be 25 values. Let's count all entries. To count the number of entries that are non-numeric, so count counts numeric values only. If I wanted to count text values, it's this count A function. It says count the number of cells that are not empty. In fact, I can apply that to this same range, and I get 25. In fact, if I look at this and I apply it to just any column, I'll get 20. Oh, here it's 24 because that one is blank. The date column, I get 25. But if I apply this count function to a different column, I get 0. So count counts numeric values here, whereas the count A is non-blank cells. So I can apply it to the same range. So I said there's a potential problem. In this count, the difference between count numeric, which is just the count, and count A, which counts non-blank, is revealing the problem. Sort of. I know that there's a problem with these amounts now. The problem is that there's two values here that are being treated as text or string values and not as numeric values. And that's very, very important. It's very important because it means that these calculations are probably not being done correctly. Excel will only perform a sum function on numeric values. Similarly, Excel will only perform an average function on numeric values. So this average function is probably wrong too. Now, what is the difference between numeric and non-numeric values? And I'm going to zoom in here to try to illustrate this. Let me just type a string. A string is text. And as soon as I typed that in and pressed enter, notice that by default, this is going to the left side of cell. If I type left and press enter, by default, string values or text values, they go to the left-hand side of the cell. But if I start typing numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, notice how by default these numeric values are being aligned on the right-hand side of the cell. So by default, text is left, numbers are right. In this expense data, everything is right aligned, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're being treated as numbers. I can shift these ones that by default are right aligned. They hug the right hand side of the cell. I can shift them to be left aligned, but they're still numbers. They're still being treated as numbers. I can see here that there's this green triangular warning that exists in the top left hand side of the cell for two of these. This is probably telling me there's a this number is formatted as a text, which is preceded by an apostrophe. So actually, you can see actually in the formula bar here, that's how you convert cells to text values, numeric values to text values, is that you insert an apostrophe in front of it. In fact, if I wanted to convert this formula to text, I could put this apostrophe or single quotation in front of it, and now it's text, and it allows me to see the formula. So it treats it like text. If it's not text, it's numeric, and it will evaluate the numeric amount. So this isn't being treated as a number. This one, let's see here. Similar problem being, it has this apostrophe in front of it. So there's a couple of ways to go about this. I could force all of these numbers here. So we have this amount clean column. I could force all of those to be numeric by inserting the amount inside of a value formula. And now this is definitely going to be treated as a numeric value. So that's one way of going about it, value, the value function. Alternatively, what I could do is copy paste if I want the amounts in the clean column and just get rid of the apostrophe. That should do it. Just delete that and go down here and delete that. So now if I update my reference to not be this raw one, but just drag my reference over to be the clean one, I see that the number is different. And over here, there are now 25 numeric values, and there are 25 entries in total. So I've fixed those potential problems. All right. So we're almost done with this one. What is the largest single expense? Well, this is going to be fairly easy for us because we already have, like, we've cleaned the data so that these are all numeric now. So there's like to look visually at the largest and the smallest, I could use the filter and it will apply this for me, or it will show it to me in numerical order from smallest to biggest, much like it did for the vendors where it was in alphabetical order, unique values only. But to have a formula return that, it's the min and the max formula. So equals min, and pass it the range of cells I want it to look at. I want it to look at numeric values only, and max, MAX, and I select that with a tab and pass it the values I want to look at. All right. So largest single expense. Oh, I got it backwards. Delete equals max. And equals min. Now this min is actually a refund, so that's not really an expense. I could actually force this to be to not look at the refund and to look at only positive amounts. It would be a minif, but that's a little bit beyond a student's first exposure to Excel, so I won't do that here. The final component is like the rent share of the total. So like what maybe to make that clear what this is asking, I believe that's like on a percentage basis. So I'm going to say rent expense first. I'll start with that. And I'll maybe indent that a little bit. So there are these like rent amounts here in our category, and how many transactions are rent and full. There's 4 in total, and it looks like it's 2,000 4 times per year. So they pay quarterly, it looks like. So to do this, if this were me, I would do a sum if function, but I'll stay away from the sum if. We're going to see that in a couple of weeks. Instead, I'm going to do this really a way that I don't like doing, but for an intro class, this is what we're going to do. I know when I applied the filter, it returned 4 rent values, so I'm just going to manually find and select them. Again, I do not think that this is a good way of going about it. It's just so prone to error. But for here, I'm just going to select those 4 values manually and press enter. So that's like the rent expense total. And if I want to know these as a percentage of all annual expenses, I could go about this in 2 ways. I could now just have another formula that says, well, my rent expense was 8,000, and divide that by my annual expenses, which is 17,340, and I get this 46%. That's the result there. Just my numerator 09, which contains the value 8,000, divided by 02, which contains the value 17,340. So I could do it in 2 different steps. If I wanted to do it as a single step, what I would need to do is be mindful of my order of operations, meaning that I need to add my numerator first. My numerator is my 4 rent expense. I need to add those together. And then divided by my total, which is up here. I'm now just going to format this as a percentage. Delete step 3, and now move on to see what's next. All right, number 4. Turn on show formulas to review your work and spot hard-coded numbers. All right, I'm going to paste this here. There's a couple of ways in which we can do this, but ideally spreadsheets are dynamic, meaning that every single thing you do is a formula such that all subsequent calculations could be will be updated accordingly if new numbers result. The rent share expense calculation I just did, notice how I referenced these cells specifically. I didn't type in 2,000 plus 2,000 plus 2,000 plus 2,000. I referenced the cells that contain the values 2,000 instead. And this is such an important point. If you're manually typing in numbers, you're introducing the possibility of human error, one. And you're limiting the flexibility of your spreadsheet and having the ability to use it moving forward as well. When I did this calculation, I said that even this one I wouldn't even do. And that's true. I don't even think that this is a good formula. However, it's a good introductory formula if this is the first time you have ever used Excel. A better one would be a sum if function here. It's just more robust and will reduce the possibility of human error. But at least this one avoids hard-coded numbers like typing in 2,000 directly into the formula. But there's a couple of ways in which we can look at this work to see if there are any hard-coded formulas anywhere. One quick way of doing this is with the show formulas command. And the way to do that is I'm going to go to the formulas tab on the ribbon, and there's this formula auditing group here, and I'm going to just click on show formulas. And what that does is wherever there's a formula, it displays it here as the formula as opposed to the output of that formula. So what I'm going to be doing here is just scanning all of them to make sure that there are no numeric values anywhere, and all of the numeric values are cell references, like I2 to I26. Those are all cell references to column I. There isn't like 2000 plus 2000 plus 2000 plus 2000 here for my rent share of expense. So everything here is a cell reference. Um, it is not a numeric value that has been hard coded into the formula. So that's what I'm just looking for here, turning on the show formulas. There's also a formula text button. Like if I needed to look at, for example, the formula at the same time as the output, there are a couple of ways in which I can do that. One way, for example, is I can copy and paste this. I already mentioned a moment ago how to convert things to text. So just by introducing this apostrophe in front of it, so I can look at the output at the same time as examining the formula here. If I were to do that, another way is with a built-in function called formula text. So if I type in formula text and select the cell, what it will do is it will just show me the formula that the cell has. So I can see the output of the formula in this column and then the actual formula at the same time. If there was a use case for that, sometimes there is. Most of the time you won't need it, but that's what this here is trying to force us into doing, is just checking our own work. Do I have anything that is hard coded in here, or is it all a cell reference? Ideally, all of your formulas, whenever possible, should be a cell reference and nothing hard coded within the cell. So that's number 4. All right. Let's go back to our instructions and see what we have next. All right, so that's everything in the expense data that we needed to do. Now we need to move into the depreciation worksheet. So I'm going to copy and paste the instructions here into the depreciation worksheet. So we've got a copy of what we're trying to work towards. Let me see, just trying to think of the best place for this. Oops. Control X, Control V. Here. All right. In depreciation, complete the following calculations. So we need to complete depreciation calculations, columns F through G. While we're doing this, we need to improve the presentation by resizing columns and cell width. And we need to wrap the text. All right, so let's actually do these first two things, or sorry, these formatting improvements first, because it's kind of messy to look at this. I can't even really see what it's asking for. So let's resize the columns and cell width. You probably actually noticed a moment ago the column was originally just like this. I couldn't see the full text. If you position your cursor between two columns, you get a horizontal black bar where in the middle there's a vertical black bar where in the middle there's a horizontal two-way arrow if you position your cursor between two columns. If you double click at this point, it's called to auto fit the column, meaning that it will expand the column width such that it will be able to display the entire text that exists within the column. So that's double clicking auto fit. Alternatively, you can specify the exact width of a column that you would like. So if I do the same thing such that I put this cursor between my two columns, where there's a vertical black bar and a horizontal two-way arrow. If I just click and drag, you can see there's this pop-up that comes up that tells me the number of pixels that exist within the column and the width. The width is referring to the number of standard characters, which is a little bit misleading because it depends on character size. So that's the number of characters that a typical column will be able to display. So 35.5 in this case right now. If you want to specify an exact width of the column, you can right click and then go column width. And I can say like I want it to be like 50 standard characters in width, and it will expand it to that for me. 99.99999% of the time, it is best to just click and drag. If I want to do multiple columns at the same time, for example, right here there's data in both column N and N. If I were to do both at the same time, select both and then double click, it will autofit both at the same time for me, which is pretty handy and useful a lot of the time. Or if I wanted to do like a specific number of columns, like a specific width, I could click and drag and it will apply that width to all of them. So I have to resize column and cell width here. So that's how you do that. So I'll erase that. Here it's saying to improve the presentation of this data through wrapping text. So what that means is sometimes, like here, it's obviously too much text to fit within one column. So we have two options. We can increase the width, or we could do what's called wrap text. So what that means is I'm gonna select these column headers, and in the Home tab, click on this wrapped text button. And what that does is it basically like inserts a line within the cell, so that the text, it's called wrapping. So instead of what's previously just one row per cell, it increases the number of rows. So it makes the row wider. So it's wrapping text. So now I can more clearly see what these are asking. And these questions are assuming that you've taken an intro level accounting course, so you're familiar with these calculations. So we're given like an acquisition date, historical cost, salvage value, and useful life, which is measured in years. And what we need to do is to calculate the annual depreciation for a typical year given these variables. So we know that, hopefully we know that depreciation expense equals historical cost minus salvage value divided by useful life. So I'm just going to basically insert that formula here. So I have my historical cost minus salvage value and divided by my useful life measured in years. Now there is a problem in this formula. Oops, and I mistyped something as I was pressing enter, so I'm just going to do that one more time. Historical cost minus salvage value divided by useful life. There is a problem here. The formula will work, but it's going to return the incorrect amount. Let me zoom in here. So I have historical cost C4, that's 12,000, minus D4, which is salvage value, divided by useful life, which is 3 years. But this is an incorrect amount. The reason is my order of operations. What this actually needs to be is the historical cost minus salvage value, my amortizable amount. It needs to be calculated first before I'm divided by my useful life. So what I need to do is be mindful of my order of operations. So I need to do brackets and make sure that this calculation happens first. Determine what my amortizable amount is, and then I'm going to divide that by my useful life measured in years, and now I'll have the annual depreciation amount here. And monthly depreciation, so it's just the per month equivalent, so that's going to be my annual amount divided by 12. And now what we're going to be doing is calculate the number of months to depreciate in 2026. So this laptop, for example, was bought, or a pool of laptops, so a number of them, were bought on February 1st, office furniture on January 15th. So I need a formula here that's going to calculate like how many months to depreciate each asset in 2026. That's what this is trying to get me to do. This is a small enough data set where we could just do mental math here. So February 1st, that's, what is that, 11 months, for example. And then this next one is basically a whole year. So that would be like 12, for example. But I'm going to say, like, whenever possible, avoid those hard-coded numbers that I was just talking about a minute ago. Whenever possible, outsource the calculation to Excel. Let Excel do all of the thinking for you. So structure your formula such that it will just do it, because it will reduce or eliminate the possibility of any human error. So the calculation here I want to do is going to be based on this date, and we can work with dates in a number of different ways. But dates are actually like numbers. So there's actually going to be several ways we could do this. But notice how these are all right aligned, meaning that they're numbers. If I were to actually change the format, it shows as 46,000. This is actually the number of days that have passed since January 1st, 1900. And actually, to show that, I'm going to copy this date and paste it over here. February 1st, 2026. And I'm going to convert this to 46,000. Now, I'm going to show this as one. In fact, maybe what I'll do is put one here and show this as a date. And it shows me as January 1st, 1900. This is day number one in Excel, January 1st, 1900. So if I were to take like this and add on 46,053, I get February 1st, 2026, which is this date here, February 1st, 2026. Because dates are just stored as basically the number of days that have passed since the first day, which is January 1st, 1900, from an Excel perspective. I mean, time existed before 1900, January 1st, but certainly computers did not. So Excel has just determined that this is like the oldest date that is here. But that allows us to do calculations with dates. We can calculate like the amount of time between certain dates. So, for example, February 1st, 2026 is not even here yet. That is in a couple of weeks away when this is being recorded. So I can say like this minus that is 16 days between these two dates. So between February 1st, 2026 and January 1st, January 16th, 2026, there are 16 days. We can just do math on these days, subtract them to calculate the days between, because Excel is just really presenting us with these formatted as a date out of convenience for how humans read dates. But really, they're just numbers, and they're just the number of days that have passed since day number one, which is January 1st, 1900. But there are also like prepackaged date related functions, like one of which is like a month function. So I can pass any date to a month function, and it will give me just the month associated with it. So the month here is number one, because in this date, the month is January. The month here is number two, because February is the second month of the year. So we can use that to our advantage. I can say like equals 12 minus month here, and just see what that gives me. And of course, it's going to give me a date, but I'm going to convert that to a number, and I'm going to say 10. So that's kind of close, but it's also like kind of wrong. It's not kind of wrong. It is wrong. It should be 11, but there's a consistent relationship here. So I can say like 12 minus the month plus 1, and format this just with no format, and that gives me 11 months of depreciation here. And we're going to assume for all of these, like January 15th was bought in the middle. We're not going to do partial month amortization. We're just going to assume like full month only. So if it's the 15th, we're going to do a full month. So that's 12. So that's how you can use dates to your advantage. And then, of course, to do this, we have our monthly amount multiplied by the number of months we're going to depreciate in 2026 to get our depreciation expense. And then our net book value, because they've all been acquired this year, is just historical cost minus our depreciation expense. And there we have it. All right, so we've calculated columns F through G. Let's go back and see. Next is number 2 here. Use formulas to compute totals and answer manager questions. So what is the total year 1 depreciation expense? That is just a sum function of the depreciation expense column. Which asset had the highest year 1 depreciation? All right, we've already seen this throughout this tutorial, but that's the max function. The max function, oops, not match, max. Max will return the highest number given a series of numeric values. So here I'm going to select the max function, depreciation. So select all of these values. And it's $3,750. And we can see that that is related to the vehicle. I mean, it's pretty easy for us to just scan a list this big and just go back to see that that's a vehicle. However, there are better, more robust ways of getting that value or getting this asset listed here. And that's through a lookup function. I'm going to use X lookup. I'm going to say like look here for this value and look in this range right here, column I. When you find the same value, so once I find it's going to go top to bottom by default. So it's going to look and see if that matches. No. This one, no. It will find a match here. Once it finds a match, I have to tell it like go to a different column, a return array. Go to this over here. And if I just do that right now, press enter, what's going to happen is it's going to return vehicle. So vehicle. So here we have a formula that's giving us the highest value. And then we have another formula that's looking for the highest value in this list or series of values. And then it's going to go to a different column and return the value that is in the same row that it found the match. So vehicle. So for example, if I delete, I'm gonna undo, but if I delete this 3,750, the next highest value is this 333, which means my where it says vehicle right now, it will return these leasehold improvements. So I'm going to delete this just for illustration. Leasehold improvements. But I'm going to undo because I want that there. All right. Count of assets listed, including check row. Well, I'm just going to count my non-blanks here and see that there's 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So that's what we've got. All right. Let's now move forward with, I think, the final component of this. We've answered the manager questions, and all that remains, I believe, is just some formatting. So let me see. Um, it's to create a summary worksheet of our analysis, and we need to add a new worksheet and move it as the first worksheet in the workbook. To create a new worksheet, it's really quite easy. In fact, you've already seen me do this a few times. We created this numeric versus non-numeric one, which was done here to illustrate how by default string values or text data is left aligned, whereas numeric values by default, are right aligned, meaning they go on the right hand side of the cell, where text goes on the left hand side. So I'm going to delete these. We don't need them. To delete a worksheet, you right click and select delete, and right click and delete. Not really required to have those two here. But we need to create a new summary worksheet. So to add a new worksheet, it's just this add button here. So I'll add it in, and it moved it right next to what was the active sheet before. So the instructions one was the active one. And it's asking me to rename the worksheet. So that's the skill we're working on here. There's two easy ways to do it. The easiest way is just select it or double click on it, and I'll call this one summary. Oops. Summary. Best practice is to always name the worksheet you're working on. Then it's telling me to move the manager questions from expense and depreciation worksheets to the newly created summary one. So let's do that. We'll go to the expense data, and we have these manager questions that are here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move them first by trying to copy paste. So I'm going to Control C to copy it to my clipboard, and if I Control V within the same worksheet, by duplicating it, you'll notice a couple of things. And I'm doing this intentionally to illustrate a very important point about spreadsheets. You'll see here my total annual expenses is $17,340, which is correct. I know or can validate that amount by highlighting a range of cells, and I get summary statistics related to those at the bottom right. So I can see here that the sum of my selection is 17,340, which matches this sum here. This one is different though. It's 11,480. The reason that is different is because the references within my cell are by default relative, meaning they're dynamic. And that's a critical component of spreadsheets, and is having dynamic cell references so you can update cell values very, very quickly. In this specific use case where I'm moving it vertically, I actually don't want my cell references to be relative. So what does that mean? If I double click on the cell, I can see the range of cells it's referencing. I2 to I26. So all within column I2 all the way down to I26. Those are the values that are being summed together. Notice that it's 2 and 26. Row 2 to 26 in column I is what it's summing here. In this one, if I double click, it's no longer 2 to 25. It's 11 to 35. Because I copied and pasted, my references were relative, which means that all of the row references increase by the same number of increments with which I am pasting my formula. So here, to demonstrate that a little bit differently, again, I'm going to introduce just like a helper worksheet, and I'm going to write something generic here. And all I'm going to do over here is have a formula that references my something generic text. So as soon as I press enter, what's going to happen is my formula will evaluate, and it's going to evaluate to return the string something generic. So I have something generic here being basically duplicated. So let me just zoom in, and I'll delete this just a little bit and zoom in further. So this is just a formula here. Now, if I were to copy and paste this vertically, as soon as I paste, it's going to return 0, nothing. 0. So here it's referencing cell C6, and C6 contains the value, something generic. When I copy that, my row reference increases if my target cell where I'm pasting, if the row reference increases. So what was before 6 is now 13, and 13 is blank. So if I type something in cell 13, let's say I type blank, as soon as I press enter, cell C13 contains the value blank, so that will pass forward to the formula over here. So I have blank over here now because that's the cell value. If I don't want my cell reference to be relative, what I have to do is actually introduce dollar signs in front of the reference. So that means no matter where I paste this vertically, it will always reference row number 6. So that's the difference between relative and absolute references. And it's very, very something you need to be mindful of if you're copying and pasting. In spreadsheets, this is something you're going to be doing all the time. Now, a key difference here between the copy paste behavior and the cut paste behavior is that the cut paste behavior is going to maintain my original cell references. So here I've Control X on my keyboard, which is a cut shortcut, and I'm going to Control V. Keep in mind here that 17,340 is the total annual expenses. 17,340.79. If I Control V now, I cut it, which means removing it from its original location and putting it somewhere different. Notice that my cell references maintained. So that's the difference between cut and paste. Now, that was all background information for me, just to say, like, I'm going to move this into my summary worksheet. Before I do that, I'll delete this one. Go back to my expense data. I'm going to Control X because I want it to have 17,340, 311. And I'm going to Control V it like somewhere here. And we can see 17,340. Okay. And I'm going to do the same thing with my manager questions over here. I'm going to select the data, Control X, go to my summary, and Control V. So this is the summary that I'm going to maybe print off and send to my manager. The summary, though, it really is formatted quite poorly right now. And if I were to give this to my manager, they would question the quality of my work. So with very little effort, we can make this, at least somewhat presentable. Off the bat, what we need to do is, I can't double click here to auto fit the column width. You can see here that I have a number of hashtags that exist in cell C14. So the column width is actually too narrow to display the cell values that are here. So I'm going to have to adjust the column width. I can double click to auto fit. That will adjust the entire column to be the width of the biggest cell that exists within that column. Additionally, there's these ones are now, the rows are too wide also. So I can do the same thing with rows. I can go position my cursor between two different rows and double click to make it narrower. And this is already a little bit better. But if I wanted to do a lot at the same time, I would highlight and double click and get them all. But we can make this even better with pretty little effort. In fact, I'm going to make sure that all of these are the same. And these relate to expenses. So I'll just give this a header. I'll call it expense analysis. And this one I'll call it expense summary. We didn't really analyze much of it. And this is depreciation summary. I'm going to bold it to make sure that it stands out. But a couple of things here, if I wanted to just quickly increase the font size, we have these shortcuts here to do that. It's maintaining the same font. It's just increasing by the next increment, usually even numbers. So going up by an increment of 2. If I wanted to do both of these at the same time, I would select expense summary control on my keyboard so that they're both selected, and then increase or decrease accordingly. These numbers also could benefit from some formatting. There's some inconsistency here. You can probably tell that right away. Like there's no currency sign in front of this one. There is in this one. There's commas to separate the thousands here, but there's not here. So for all of these like numeric values, I'm going to apply a consistent formatting to those. So I'm just hitting Control on my keyboard, and then I'm going to go to just one of the like prepackaged defaults here. Nothing too fancy. So I'm going to just look at this in a print preview to see what it looks like. The print preview, just file and print, it shows up here. And this is okay. There's nothing wrong with this, but you'll notice a couple of things. It doesn't include any grid lines. So there's kind of two ways about this. I'm going to X out of my print preview. And what I'm going to do is before my print preview, actually, like this is not a bad way of doing it, but maybe I want, instead of my expense summary to be on top of my depreciation summary, maybe I want a different presentation of that. So I'm going to show you a different way to kind of move things around. Earlier we did Control X, Control V. We can do that again, Control X, and Control V, to move it up there, and just wrap text and double click if we wanted them, beside each other. But if I don't want to move it like that, like I could highlight the data and put my cursor around the border until you get this four-way arrow that exists. If I click now, I have the ability to click and drag to just move it to wherever I want. Maybe I don't want like that much space between these two. Maybe I want less space. So I can delete a column and narrow this column, for example. So that's one way of going about it. So now I'm going to go back into print preview and see what this looks like. But before I do that, I'm going to make one more adjustment. I'm going to go to page layout. Here, there's this sheet options group. By default, the grid lines, they do not get printed. So here I'm going to toggle on print and go back to my print preview. In fact, a shortcut for that will be Control P on my keyboard. It doesn't look the same that it used to look. It's now printing on 2 pages, and it really doesn't look all that great. In fact, it looked much better before. So let's go back to see if we can make some improvements to try to see what's going on and why. In this like default view, we're always going to be in the normal view, and this is my preferred like way of looking at data. But you have these other views. My cursor is the bottom right. The next one over is this page layout. And this is basically how it's going to print, including the margins on the page. So this is sometimes a useful way to look at it, especially if you want to print headers and footers. This is basically how you're going to be adding and editing them. But if you don't want to see the margins, you have this like page break, and I'm going to have to zoom in so we can see these. So we have 2 pages here, page 1, page 2, and it's just highlighting essentially what is going to be printed. So this is what's going to be printed on page 1 and what's going to be printed on page 2. But let's go back to normal here. We printed the grid lines, which Control P. In our print preview, like notice how it's printing the grid lines basically from the top of the page all the way down to the extent for which there's data. To me, that doesn't really look all that great. So I'm going to actually turn off print grid lines. Instead, what I'll do is maybe just add borders to the data only. So I turned off my print grid lines, but instead I'm going to add borders. So with my selection, I'm going to select here, and I'm going to control on my keyboard and select over here as well. And go down here to my borders, and I'm going to say like print all borders. So that's going to print all borders on all four sides of all of the cells that I have selected. And maybe what I can do over here is actually merge these cells. So now we have depreciation summary and expense summary, and let's just see how this prints now. So that's like a much cleaner presentation, but it's printing on 2 pages. I don't really want to do that. I don't want 2 pages printed, not really necessary. So what we could do, again, just click and drag it to be like vertical again over here. But I'm going to Control Z to undo that because I, for whatever reason, maybe my manager likes things side by side. I don't know. What I can do is select the data actually, and I'm going to say Control P, and I'm going to say don't print the active sheet, like print my selection, and I'm going to scale it so that all my columns fit on one page. And now it's side by side. But this is now like also not great. It's by default printing in portrait, my portrait orientation. And I can change that here to be landscape, but I can also change it in the worksheet itself. I have this page layout group. I can say orientation and landscape. And now with it landscape, I'm going to just see how that prints. It's a little bit better already. I have my expense summary, my depreciation summary, and I don't have to do any scaling. Or it recalled my scaling from before. So I guess I do have to scale it to fit all columns on one page. But I can say print my selection, and it will probably print a little bit cleaner. Oh, I only have one cell selected. Print selection. So that's cleaner. So not much work will allow you to format workbooks accordingly. And there you have it. Okay, I hope this was useful. All I'm going to do now is move this summary worksheet to the very front of my have it be the first tab or first worksheet that exists. So you can just click and drag to move them around. If I wanted to be the last, I'd let go here, but I'm just going to put it right up front. There we go. So there it is. Somebody's first ever intro into Excel. In this video, we covered some basic formatting, which is the last component of it, including cell borders, font size, page orientation, printing grid lines, scaling. But we also earlier on included ways to cleanse data with flash fill, text to columns, and with text functions.